For years, the Brooklyn Nets have been searching for something every struggling franchise dreams about. Not a temporary superstar, not a player they have to convince to stay, a true foundation.
For me, after getting to know some of the coaches, front office, and just the whole organization, it was really exciting for me to have a chance to be back here.
Someone who can change the direction of our entire organization, because Brooklyn has tried almost everything. They traded for legends, built super teams, chased instant success, and every time, they ended up asking the same question. What comes next? The first major gamble came when the Nets traded for Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett. The idea was simple: bring in proven champions, create a contender, and win immediately. But instead, the trade became one of the biggest mistakes in franchise history. Then came the biggest experiment of them all: Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, James Harden, 3 future Hall of Famers, a roster filled with enough talent to dominate the NBA. On the paper, it looked unstoppable. But basketball is not played on paper. Injuries, chemistry issues, and constant uncertainty turned one of the most talented teams ever assembled into one of the biggest what-ifs in NBA history. Brooklyn tried again. This time, instead of chasing established stars, they tried to build around Mikal Bridges, a talented two-way wing, a player who represented a new direction. But eventually, the Nets made the decision every rebuilding team has to make: start over. And this time, they weren't searching for the next superstar, they were trying to develop one. Because with the 8th overall pick in the 2025 NBA draft, Brooklyn selected a player many people are still trying to understand. A 6'8" guard from Moscow, Russia, a player who wasn't the most explosive athlete, wasn't the biggest name, and wasn't viewed as a guaranteed franchise player. But Brooklyn saw something different. Something that doesn't always show up on a scouting report is basketball IQ, patience, vision, and the ability to control the game without needing the ball every possession. His name is Egor Dëmin, and if the Nets are right, he could become the player they've been searching for all these years. The player who finally gives Brooklyn something they never truly had: an identity. But before understanding why the Nets believe in him, you have to understand where his story began.
You were born in Moscow, Russia.
That was an amazing opportunity for me, kind of enjoying just the journey, right, of basketball, never thinking of, okay, I have no choice at this point because I love basketball so much.
Egor Dëmin's basketball journey did not begin in America, it started in Russia. Basketball was already a part of his life. Both of his parents played at a high level, giving him an understanding of the game before most players even began serious training. But at only 15 years old, Dëmin made the decision that would completely change his future. He left Russia, moved to Spain, and joined one of the greatest basketball organizations in the world, Real Madrid. While most teenagers were trying to become the best player on their local team, Dëmin was competing against some of the best players in Europe. The transition wasn't easy: a new country, a new language, a completely different basketball environment. But instead of relying on athletic ability, Dëmin developed something much more valuable: an understanding of the game. At Real Madrid, basketball was treated like a chess match. Players weren't just taught where to go, they were taught why they were going there. That environment shaped Dëmin into one of the smartest guards in his class. He learned how to manipulate defenders, how to control the pace, and how to create advantages before defenses even realized they existed. That became his biggest strength. Dëmin was never the player who won because he was the fastest or the strongest on the court. He won because he was already thinking one step ahead. But one question followed him everywhere: could he shoot? Because in today's NBA, a great passer who cannot shoot becomes much easier to defend. Defenders can go under screens, shrink the floor, and force the offense into difficult situations. That concern followed Dëmin all the way up to draft night. But Brooklyn saw something most teams didn't. They didn't see a player defined by a weakness, they saw a player with elite tools who needed one part of his game to be unlocked. And on draft night, the Nets made their decision. With the 8th overall pick in the 2025 draft, Brooklyn selected Egor Dëmin, and immediately the questions began. Could he improve his jumper? Could a 6'8" point guard without elite athleticism become the centerpiece of an NBA franchise? Then, something started changing the conversation. Coming into the NBA, almost every scouting report on Egor Dëmin sounded the same: elite basketball IQ, great size, advanced passing ability, questionable shooting. And in today's NBA, the last part can determine everything, because the difference between a talented player and a player defenses fear is whether teams can leave you open or not. If defenders don't respect your jumper, they will just collapse the paint and take away the biggest strength of a playmaker. Brooklyn knew Dëmin's future depended on answering one question: could he make teams pay? So instead of changing who he was, the Nets focused on unlocking what was already there: his mechanics, footwork, and most importantly, his confidence. The player who entered the league with questions about his shot started becoming the player defenses could no longer ignore. The weakness everyone talked about started becoming one of his biggest weapons. Yeoman finished his rookie season shooting 38% from 3, knocking down 124 three-pointers with over 300 attempts. The concern that followed him into the NBA became the skill that changed his entire game, because once defenders respect your jumper, everything opens up. Closeouts become easier to attack, passing lanes become wider, and his biggest strengths became even more dangerous: his vision, patience, and ability to read the floor. Because Yeoman doesn't play basketball like he's trying to beat defenders physically, he plays like he's trying to solve them. And that's what makes elite playmakers special. That's why people started seeing similarities between Yeoman and other oversized playmakers. Some saw elements of Josh Giddey, a 6'8" guard with incredible vision and the ability to control an offense. Others saw flashes of Lonzo Ball, a player who understood that moving the ball faster than defense could react was a weapon. There were even moments that reminded people of Hedo Turkoglu, a bigger creator who could run an offense and impact games without dominating every possession. But the more Yeoman played, the clearer it became. He wasn't trying to become the next version of someone else, he was creating his own identity. A 6'8" guard who could shoot, create, play multiple positions, and fit perfectly into the direction the NBA is heading. Because the modern NBA is no longer built around one player doing everything, the best teams have multiple creators, players who can punish defenses in different ways, and Yeoman's skill set fits that future. But the biggest reason Brooklyn became excited wasn't just his potential, it was the moments where the game slowed down. The moments where it looked like he belonged. Even as a rookie, there were flashes of a player the Nets believed they drafted. Against Orlando, Yeoman exploded for 26 points while hitting 6 3-pointers, a game where his confidence was obvious. Against Utah, he delivered a 25-point, 10-rebound performance, showing he wasn't just a passer. He could impact games in multiple ways. And against San Antonio, he controlled the offense with 9 assists, not because he forced plays, but because he constantly made the right decision. Those performances matter because they showed something bigger than statistics. They showed a blueprint, a player who could become the engine of an offense. And for the first time in years, Brooklyn looked like they had a player whose development mattered more than their next superstar chase. But just as the excitement started building, everything changed. Just when Yeoman began to change the conversation, his rookie season came to an unexpected end. The Nets shut him down because he had a foot injury, and immediately the questions returned. Because injuries create doubt, especially for young players whose game depend on balance, movement, and footwork. Could he stay healthy? Would this slow down his development? For Brooklyn, this became the first major test of their rebuild. Because rebuilding teams are judged by one thing: can they develop talent? The Nets didn't panic. They didn't rush him back to win meaningless games. They focused on the bigger picture. The goal wasn't a few extra wins. The goal was building a foundation that could last for years. So Yeoman spent the offseason doing what every young star has to do: recover, get stronger, prepare for the next challenge. And when Summer League arrived, everyone was watching. Not because it was proven he could dominate younger competition, but because fans wanted an answer. Did the injury change him? The answer was clear: it did not. Yeoman looked more comfortable, more aggressive, and more in control. The game appeared slower, his decisions became quicker, and his confidence returned. He became the offensive centerpiece of Brooklyn's Summer League team. He averaged 22 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists, but the numbers weren't the biggest story. The eye test was. The jumper was smoother, the handle was tighter, and the biggest advantage he has always had remained impossible to teach: size. At 6'8", Yeoman creates problems that most guards cannot. Smaller defenders struggle to contest his shot, bigger defenders struggle to stay in front of him, and because he can pass over the top of defenses, he creates opportunities that many players simply cannot. That combination is why Brooklyn believes they didn't just draft a talented player, they drafted someone who has the tools to become something much bigger: a franchise cornerstone. The biggest question surrounding Egor Dëmin isn't whether he can become a good player. The NBA is filled with talent, players who can score, players who look promising early in their careers, but becoming a franchise player is different. The real question is, can Dëmin become the player who changes the direction of an entire organization? Because that's what Brooklyn has been searching for. Not another exciting player, not another short-term solution, a foundation, a player who creates an identity. And that has been the biggest problem for the Nets for years. Talent was never the issue. They had stars, they had opportunities, but what they never had was stability. The Durant, Kyrie, Harden era had unbelievable talent, but it was built around a championship window that disappeared before Brooklyn could truly build something sustainable. This rebuild is different, because the Nets aren't trying to skip steps, they're not trying to buy a championship overnight, they're trying to build something that lasts. And that starts with finding the type of player every successful franchise needs, a player who makes everyone around him better. because the greatest franchise players in NBA history had one thing in common. They didn't just produce numbers, they changed the identity of their organization. Stephen Curry didn't just become the greatest shooter ever, he transformed Golden State into a completely different type of basketball team. Tim Duncan wasn't just an elite power forward, he became the foundation of the Spurs culture for over 2 decades. LeBron James wasn't just a superstar, every organization he joined immediately changed because of his presence. Those players represented more than talent, they represented a direction, a standard, a belief, and that's the challenge that's waiting for Egor Dëmin. Can he become that for Brooklyn? The player opposing teams have to prepare for, the player who makes the Nets matter again. Brooklyn believes he has the tools because his game is built around things that usually age well: basketball IQ, size, vision, and shooting ability. Those are the skills that allow players to continue to improve long after their athletic ability begins to decline. But becoming a franchise player is not just about individual talent. No young star succeeds alone. The greatest players always had the right environment around them. Jordan had Pippen, Curry had Clay and Draymond, Duncan had an entire system built around him. The future of Brooklyn will not be decided by Egor alone, it will depend on whether the Nets can build the right ecosystem around him. And that starts with finding players who complement his strengths. One of the biggest pieces could be another young playmaker, Mikal Bridges Jr. At first glance, some people question the fit. 2 young guards trying to establish themselves, but that misses what makes Dëmin different. He doesn't need the ball every possession to impact the game. His shooting allows him to play on and off the ball. If Brown attacks the defense, Dëmin can space the floor. If defenders collapse, Dëmin becomes the secondary curator. If the offense needs someone to slow the game down, he can take control. Instead of competing for touches, they create more options. And that's exactly how modern NBA offenses are built. Multiple creators, multiple players who can punish the defense. Brooklyn isn't trying to create another superstar experiment, they're trying to build something sustainable. A team where Dëmin doesn't have to carry everything, a team where his strengths become more dangerous because of the talent around him. But now comes the hardest part, the part every young player eventually faces: expectations. Because the moment a franchise believes you are the future, the pressure changes. Defenses adjust, weaknesses become targets. Every mistake becomes analyzed, and that's where players separate themselves. Dëmin has already answered some questions, he proved he could adapt, he proved he could overcome doubt, but becoming a franchise player requires something even bigger: consistency, leadership, and the ability to make winning plays when everything is against you. Nobody knows exactly how high his ceiling will be. Maybe he becomes an all-star, maybe he becomes the face of Brooklyn basketball for the next decade. The future is still unwritten, but for the first time in a long time, the Nets aren't searching for their next big move, they aren't hoping someone chooses Brooklyn, they're building from within, and at the center of that future is Egor Dëmin. For years, the Brooklyn Nets tried to build a championship team by finding stars. This time, they're trying something different. They're building a star, and that difference could change everything. Because the greatest franchises in NBA history were not defined by the players they chased, they were defined by the players they developed. Golden State had Curry, San Antonio had Duncan, Los Angeles had Kobe. Every era of basketball has a player who becomes more than just a talent, a player who becomes the reason fans believe. Brooklyn believes Egor Dëmin can become that player. The player who gives the franchise an identity, the player who brings stability after years of uncertainty. Because after years of searching, the Nets may have finally found what every team is looking for. Not just a player or a prospect, the beginning of something bigger. Now comes the hardest part: turning potential into greatness, turning hope into winning, and proving that Brooklyn's biggest gamble was actually their smartest decision. Because if Egor Dëmin becomes the player the Nets believe he can become, the next chapter for Brooklyn basketball might already have started. For years, Brooklyn searched everywhere for a player who could change everything. They searched through trades, free agency, super teams, but the answer was never found. Maybe it had to be built. And that journey begins now with Egor Dëmin.